December 23rd, 1941, 0447 hours, 500 miles southwest of Oahu, Hawaii. Commander Yokota Minoru pressed his face against the cold rubber eyepiece of the periscope, watching the massive American aircraft carrier slice through the pre-dawn darkness. USS Saratoga, 33,000 tons of American naval power, steamed at 18 knots, completely unaware of the predator stalking beneath the waves. Yokota allowed himself a thin smile. After 17 days of patient pursuit since departing Kwajalein, his submarine I-26 had achieved perfect firing position. The mathematics of destruction were already calculated. Range 1,200 meters, target speed 18 knots, bearing steady. His Type 95 torpedoes, the most advanced underwater weapons in the world, waited in their tubes like coiled serpents. "Prepare tubes 1 through 4, Yokota commanded softly. His crew moved with the fluid precision that came from years of training. The Imperial Japanese Navy's submarine force represented the elite of Japan's maritime power. These men had practiced this moment 1,000 times. Through his hydrophone operators, Yokota could hear the Saratoga's screws churning the water. The American carrier's propeller noise filled the ocean like thunder, making acoustic tracking effortless. The Americans, Yokota had been taught, were technologically backward in underwater warfare. Their detection equipment was primitive, their anti-submarine tactics crude. They relied on visual spotting and luck, while Japanese submarines operated with near invisibility. Fire 1, Fire 2. The submarine shuddered as compressed air expelled the first torpedoes. Fire 3. Yokota counted the seconds. At 1,200 meters, traveling at 49 knots, his torpedoes would reach the target in approximately 75 seconds. He kept his eye pressed to the periscope, watching the carrier's massive silhouette. The explosion, when it came, sent a column of water skyward that was visible even in the darkness. The torpedo had struck Saratoga on her starboard side, below the waterline, tearing a hole 30 feet wide in her hull. The carrier immediately began listing, taking on thousands of tons of water. "Dive! Dive! Take us to 100 meters!" Yokota ordered. As I-26 slipped deeper into the protective darkness of the ocean, her commander felt the satisfaction of a successful hunt. The Imperial Japanese Navy had struck another blow against American naval power. What Yokota couldn't know was that this early success represented the twilight of Japanese submarine dominance, not its dawn. Within 18 months, the acoustic advantage he took for granted would become a deadly illusion, shattered by American technology that could detect his submarines at ranges he couldn't imagine. The early war period confirmed every assumption Japanese submarine commanders held about their superiority. Between December 1941 and June 1942, Japanese submarines achieved remarkable success. I-6 torpedoed USS Saratoga again in January 1942, putting her in dry dock for months. I-168 sank the damaged carrier USS Yorktown and destroyer USS Hamon at Midway in June 1942. I-19, in a single attack on September 15, 1942, damaged the carrier USS Wasp, sank the destroyer USS O'Brien, and damaged the battleship USS North Carolina with a spread of 6 torpedoes. The statistics supported Japanese confidence. By the end of 1942, Japanese submarines had sunk or damaged over 180 Allied vessels, including 2 aircraft carriers, 2 cruisers, and numerous merchant ships. Their Type 95 oxygen-fueled torpedoes left no wake, making them nearly impossible to detect. Their crews were extensively trained, many with over a decade of experience. More importantly, Japanese submariners believed they possessed superior acoustic detection capabilities. The Type 93 hydrophone system, standard equipment on all fleet submarines, could detect surface vessels at ranges up to 2 miles under ideal conditions. Operators trained for years to distinguish between different ship types by their acoustic signatures. The sound of American destroyers' high-speed screws was distinctly different from the deeper throb of battleship propellers. American anti-submarine warfare, by Japanese assessment, was primitive. U.S. Navy destroyers relied primarily on visual detection, spotting periscopes or surfaced submarines. Their depth charge attacks were area weapons, dropping explosives in patterns and hoping for proximity kills. Japanese submarine commanders had been taught that as long as they maintained depth discipline and avoided visual detection, they were effectively invisible to American hunters. Commander Kinashi Takakazu of Lase 19, whose September 1942 attack had damaged 3 American capital ships simultaneously, wrote in his war diary, "The Americans search blindly, dropping their charges based on guesswork. We hear them pass overhead, their propellers loud and distinctive, while they remain unaware of our presence. It is like a blind man searching for a shadow." This confidence was reinforced by Japanese doctrine. The Imperial Navy's submarines were designed primarily for fleet actions, hunting enemy capital ships rather than merchant vessels. They were large, long-range boats capable of operating for 90 days without refueling, cruising at 24 knots surfaced. The I-class fleet submarines displaced over 2,000 tons, carried 20 torpedoes, and mounted deck guns for surface action. By comparison, Japanese intelligence assessed American submarines as inferior. Smaller, shorter-ranged, and less capable, American boats seemed designed for defensive operations rather than aggressive hunting. Japanese submariners believed they were facing an enemy who understood neither submarine warfare's subtleties nor its technological requirements. The hydrophone stations aboard Japanese submarines represented what they considered cutting-edge technology. Operators sat in quiet compartments, wearing sensitive headphones connected to hull-mounted hydrophones. They could hear propeller noise, engine sounds, and even hull creaks from enemy vessels. Experienced operators could identify ship classes by their acoustic signatures, determining range through sound intensity and bearing through directional hydrophones. What Japanese submariners didn't understand was that while they listened passively to the ocean's sounds, American scientists and engineers were developing something revolutionary: active acoustic detection that would transform underwater warfare forever. At Bell Telephone Laboratories in New York and the U.S. Navy's Sound Laboratory in San Diego, researchers had been working since the late 1930s on sonar systems that didn't just listen, but actively searched. These systems sent acoustic pulses through the water, then measured the returning echoes from underwater objects. The technology, called Sonar, sound navigation and ranging, would give American submarine hunters the ability to detect and track submerged targets at ranges Japanese commanders couldn't conceive. But in December 1941, as Commander Yokota Minoru celebrated his successful attack on USS Saratoga, these developments remained unknown to Japanese naval intelligence. The Imperial Navy's submarine force prepared for a war they believed they would dominate through superior training, better torpedoes, and technological advantage in acoustic detection. They were about to discover they were wrong about everything. May 15, 1943, 03:12 hours, 40 miles northeast of Guadalcanal. Commander Kinashi Takakazu stood in the control room of IN-19, his submarine running silent at 60 meters depth. After 2 days stalking an American convoy, he had finally achieved attack position. Through his hydrophones, he could hear the distinctive throb of multiple propellers, merchant vessels loaded with supplies for the American advance up the Solomon Islands. "Range to target?" Kinashi asked his navigation officer. "Estimated 3,000 meters, sir, based on acoustic intensity." Kinashi nodded. The convoy was still beyond visual range, but sound carried far in these tropical waters. His hydrophone operators had been tracking the ships for over an hour, plotting their course and speed. The Americans were steaming in a predictable pattern, escorts on the flanks, cargo ships in the center. Standard doctrine. Predictable. "Prepare for periscope depth," Kinashi commanded. We'll close to 1,500 meters before... Commander! The hydrophone operator's voice cut through the quiet, sharp with something Kinashi had never heard from him before. Fear. Active sonar. Bearing 040. Multiple sources. Kinashi froze. Active sonar. The Americans were pinging. But that was impossible. The convoy was still over 3 kilometers away, far beyond any detection range Japanese intelligence had assessed for American equipment. "Distance?" Kinashi demanded. "Unable to determine precisely, sir." "The signals are very strong. Multiple contacts. I count at least 4 separate sources." Then came the sound that would haunt Kinashi for the rest of his life. Ping. A sharp metallic echo reverberating through the submarine's hull. Then another. Ping. And another. Ping. Each pulse seemed to pass through the steel plating and into his chest. "They cannot have detected us," Kinashi said, but even as he spoke, he knew it was wrong. The pinging was intensifying, the intervals shortening. The Americans weren't searching randomly. They were tracking. "All engines ahead full. Take us to 100 meters. Emergency dive." I-19 tilted forward, her electric motors straining, but the pinging continued, following them. Ping, ping, ping. The sound was relentless, mechanical, precise, like a heartbeat that promised death. "Propeller noise closing from astern," the hydrophone operator reported. "High-speed screws, destroyer class, range decreasing rapidly." Kinashi gripped the periscope housing. This wasn't supposed to be possible. Japanese submarine doctrine was built on a fundamental assumption. Submerged submarines were invisible to surface vessels unless visually spotted. The Americans weren't supposed to have technology that could detect a submarine at 3 kilometers depth through active acoustics. "Range to destroyer?" Kinashi asked, his voice tight. 2,000 meters and closing. Speed estimated 25 knots. The American destroyer was charging directly at them, not searching in patterns, not dropping random depth charges, but pursuing with deadly purpose. They knew exactly where I-19 was located. Ping, ping, ping. "Rig for depth charge," Kinashi ordered, and his crew moved quickly to secure loose equipment, close watertight doors, and prepare for the shock of underwater explosions. The first pattern of depth charges fell at 0319 hours, just 7 minutes after initial sonar contact. Kinashi heard them falling, a series of splashes above, then the terrible waiting as the charges sank toward their preset depths. The explosions, when they came, were closer than any Kinashi had experienced. The submarine bucked and rolled. Light bulbs shattered. Cork insulation rained from the overhead. Men were thrown against bulkheads. The hull groaned under the pressure waves. "Damage report!" Kinashi shouted over the ringing in his ears. "Minor flooding in the forward torpedo room. Hydraulic leaks. Main motors functioning. Hull integrity maintained." Another pattern fell, this one even closer. The force of the explosions drove I-19 deeper, her depth gauge spinning past 120 meters. Paint chips filled the air like snow. A seam in the pressure hull began weeping salt water, a small stream that represented death if it widened. Through it all, the pinging never stopped. Ping, ping, ping. The Americans were tracking them through every evasive maneuver. "Come left to 270, Kinashi ordered. Slow to 1/3 speed." Silent running. I-19 crept through the darkness, her crew frozen in place, barely breathing. But the pinging found them anyway. The destroyer above adjusted course, matching their turn with terrifying precision. A third pattern of depth charges fell. Then a fourth. The submarine's electrical systems began failing. The air grew thick with chlorine gas from cracked battery cells mixing with seawater. Men coughed and gagged, pressing wet rags to their faces. "Commander, we cannot survive another pattern," the executive officer said quietly. "We must surface." Kinashi knew he was right, but surfacing meant facing the destroyer's guns, almost certain death or capture. Staying down meant being crushed by depth charges guided by that impossible sonar. Ping, ping, ping. "How are they doing this?" one of the younger officers whispered. "How can they see us?" No one had an answer. Japanese submarine doctrine had no procedures for this scenario, because Japanese naval intelligence had insisted it couldn't happen. American detection equipment was supposed to be primitive, limited to a few hundred meters at best. Yet here they were, being hunted by an enemy who could track them through kilometers of seawater with mechanical precision. A fifth pattern fell. This one close enough that the concussion knocked out the remaining lights. In the darkness, lit only by emergency lanterns, I-19 felt less like a warship and more like a tomb. "Blow all ballast! Emergency surface," Kinashi finally ordered. There was no other choice. I-19 clawed her way to the surface, breaking through at 0347 hours. Kinashi threw open the conning tower hatch, gasping in the sweet tropical air. 2 miles away, he could see the American destroyer, a Fletcher-class vessel that was already turning to bring her guns to bear. But before the destroyer could fire, Kinashi gave the order that saved his crew. "White flag. Prepare to abandon ship." The American destroyer, USS Nicholas, ceased fire and approached cautiously. As I-19's crew assembled on deck for surrender, Kinashi stared at the destroyer's superstructure, trying to understand the technology that had defeated him. He could see a peculiar dome mounted beneath the waterline at the bow, something he'd never observed on previous encounters with American warships. That dome, he would later learn, housed a QC-type sonar transducer. The device could transmit acoustic pulses at 24 kHz, far beyond human hearing range, and detect the returning echoes from underwater objects at ranges exceeding 2,500 meters. The system could determine not just range and bearing, but depth. It could track a submarine through every evasive maneuver, guiding depth charge attacks with lethal accuracy. The Americans hadn't just improved their detection equipment, they had revolutionized it, creating technology that rendered Japanese submarines' greatest advantage, their stealth, completely obsolete. As American sailors took I-19's crew into custody, one young lieutenant approached Kinashi. "Your submarine," he said in broken Japanese. "We heard you from 5 miles out. Our sonar tracked you the whole time. You never had a chance. 5 miles, over 8 kilometers, more than 4 times the maximum range of Japanese hydrophones." Kinashi felt something break inside him, a fundamental assumption about naval warfare that had sustained his confidence throughout the war. The Americans weren't just equal, they were generations ahead. Word of I-19's capture and the circumstances of her detection spread through the Imperial Navy's submarine force like a contagion. Commanders who had operated with absolute confidence in their invisibility now faced a terrifying reality. The Americans could see them. The ocean, once a protective cloak, had become transparent. In Tokyo, naval intelligence received Kinashi's initial report with skepticism. 5-mile detection range? Impossible. The report must be exaggerated, a face-saving explanation for a tactical error. But as more submarines reported similar encounters being detected and attacked from ranges that shouldn't have been possible, the skepticism turned to alarm. The silent hunters had become the hunted, and the Americans were just getting started. November 1940. Bell Telephone Laboratories, Murray Hill, New Jersey. Dr. Harvey Fletcher stood before a blackboard covered with acoustic equations, explaining to a room full of Navy officers how underwater sound propagation could revolutionize submarine detection. The men in uniform listened with varying degrees of skepticism. Active sonar, Fletcher explained, wasn't just an improvement over passive hydrophones. It was a fundamental transformation of anti-submarine warfare. "Gentlemen," Fletcher said, tapping the blackboard with his chalk, Passive listening has inherent limitations. You can only detect what the enemy allows you to hear. Active sonar inverts the equation. We control the acoustic environment. We send the signal. We measure the return. The submarine becomes visible whether it wants to be or not. The technology Fletcher described had been in development since World War I, when primitive echo-ranging equipment had shown promise but lacked the precision and range for practical use. 20 years of peacetime research at Bell Labs, working in partnership with the Navy's Sound Laboratory in San Diego, had transformed crude prototypes into sophisticated detection systems. The breakthrough came through understanding sound propagation in seawater. Sound travels approximately 4,900 feet per second underwater, nearly 5 times faster than in air. But ocean temperature, salinity, and pressure create acoustic layers that bend sound waves, creating detection shadows where submarines could hide. Bell Labs engineers developed transducers that could operate at multiple frequencies, compensating for these thermal layers. The QC sonar system, standardized for destroyer escorts by 1942, represented the culmination of this research. The transducer, mounted in a streamlined dome beneath the ship's bow, could transmit 24 kHz pulses with enough power to detect a submarine-sized object at 2,500 yards under typical conditions. In ideal acoustic environments, detection ranges exceeded 4,000 yards, nearly 2.5 miles. By comparison, Japanese Type 93 hydrophones were purely passive systems with maximum detection ranges of 3,500 yards, and only under perfect conditions with the target vessel making substantial noise. Japanese submarines, designed for silent running, could rarely detect American warships beyond 2,000 yards. The production statistics told the story of American industrial commitment. Western Electric, Bell Labs' manufacturing arm, produced the first QC sets in early 1942. By June 1942, production reached 200 units monthly. By December 1942, 500 monthly. By mid-1943, Western Electric and subcontractors were delivering 1,200 sonar sets per month, enough to equip every destroyer, destroyer escort, and submarine chaser entering service. The manufacturing process itself demonstrated American industrial sophistication. Each QC transducer required precise crystal arrays, waterproof housings machined to tolerances of 1,000th of an inch, and complex electrical components that had to function under extreme pressure and temperature variations. Workers, many of them women who had never seen electronic equipment before Pearl Harbor, assembled these systems with quality control that exceeded peacetime standards. By war's end, over 60,000 sonar sets of various types had been manufactured and installed on American, British, and Allied vessels. Japan, by contrast, produced fewer than 800 hydrophone sets during the entire war, most of them primitive passive systems inferior even to pre-war American equipment. Training proved equally crucial. The U.S. Navy established sonar schools at Key West, Florida, and San Diego, California, graduating classes of operators every 6 weeks. By 1943, these schools were producing over 2,000 qualified sonar operators monthly. Each operator received 240 hours of instruction, including classroom work on acoustic theory, practical exercises with training equipment, and at-sea experience tracking practice targets. Lieutenant James Harper, who attended Key West Sonar School in March 1943, described the training intensity. We learned to distinguish between submarine echoes, schools of fish, thermal layers, and sea bottom returns. We practiced range estimation until we could call it within 50 yards. We learned to track contacts through evasive maneuvers, maintaining the acoustic lock even when targets changed depth and bearing. By graduation, we could identify a submerged submarine from its echo characteristics alone. Japanese submarine crews received no equivalent training. Their hydrophone operators learned through apprenticeship, studying under experienced petty officers. There were no schools, no standardized curriculum, no systematic approach to acoustic detection. Japan simply lacked the industrial capacity and technical knowledge to develop such programs. The sonar technology required supporting systems that demonstrated America's integrated approach to warfare. The QC sets fed information to mechanical calculators that computed target range, bearing, and depth in real time. These calculators, themselves marvels of analog computing, guided depth charge release mechanisms that could drop patterns with precision timing. The Mark X Hedgehog weapon, introduced in 1943, worked synergistically with sonar. Unlike conventional depth charges that exploded at preset depths, Hedgehog fired 24 contact-fused projectiles in a forward-throwing pattern. This allowed attacking ships to maintain sonar contact throughout the attack, adjusting aim based on continuous tracking data. Japanese submarines had no defense against this combination of precise detection and forward-throwing weapons. Commander Howard Crosby, captain of the destroyer escort USS Reuben James, explained the tactical advantage in a 1943 report. Previous anti-submarine attacks required us to pass over the submarine's position, losing sonar contact during the critical moments of weapon release. Depth charge patterns were area weapons, hoping for proximity kills. With Hedgehog and continuous sonar tracking, we maintain acoustic lock throughout the attack. We can adjust our aim until the moment of firing. The submarine has nowhere to hide. The production of destroyer escorts themselves represented American industrial mobilization. These purpose-built submarine hunters, equipped with the latest sonar and weapons, rolled off production lines at unprecedented rates. Between 1943 and 1945, American shipyards delivered 563 destroyer escorts, an average of one every 3 days. Each vessel cost approximately $6 million and carried a crew of 200 men, all trained in anti-submarine warfare. Japanese shipyards, by comparison, struggled to replace losses in their submarine fleet. Building a single I-class submarine required 18 months and resources that Japan increasingly couldn't spare. American submarines were sinking Japanese merchant vessels faster than they could be replaced, strangling Japan's war economy. The Imperial Navy couldn't afford to dedicate scarce industrial capacity to building more submarines when they needed destroyers, carriers, and cargo vessels. The acoustic advantage extended beyond technology to doctrine. American anti-submarine warfare evolved continuously throughout the war. The 10th Fleet, established in May 1943 under Admiral Francis Lowe, coordinated all anti-submarine operations in the Atlantic. Intelligence, technology, and tactics were integrated into a comprehensive system. In the Pacific, submarines faced similar systematic hunting. Task groups combined destroyer escorts, escort carriers providing air cover, and sophisticated radio intelligence that could vector hunting groups towards suspected submarine positions. Once sonar made contact, the kill was nearly inevitable. The statistics from mid-1943 onward reflected this overwhelming advantage. In the 6 months following the introduction of widespread QC sonar, American forces sank 37 Japanese submarines. In the same period, Japanese submarines sank 12 American vessels, mostly merchant ships caught alone. The exchange ratio had reversed completely from the war's early months. Technical specifications told the story in numbers. QC sonar transmitted pulses at 24 kHz with 1 kilowatt power. Maximum detection range under ideal conditions exceeded 4,500 yards. Bearing accuracy, plus or minus 2 degrees. Range accuracy, plus or minus 25 yards. Depth estimation, plus or minus 20 feet. Japanese Type 93 hydrophones operated passively across a frequency range of 100 to 10,000 Hz. Maximum detection range, 3,500 yards against noisy targets, often less than 1,500 yards against quiet vessels. Bearing accuracy, plus or minus 10 degrees. No range measurement capability without manual triangulation. No depth estimation. The American advantage wasn't just quantitative, but qualitative. Every aspect of the anti-submarine warfare system, from initial detection through final kill, reflected systematic engineering and industrial capacity that Japan couldn't match. By late 1943, Japanese submarine commanders understood they faced an enemy whose acoustic detection capabilities made traditional submarine warfare impossible. The ocean had become transparent, and American hunters could see through it with mechanical precision. May 19, 1944. 0840 hours. Philippine Sea, 220 miles northeast of Manus Island. Lieutenant Commander Walton Pendleton stood in the sonar room of USS England, watching his operators track a contact that had appeared on their scopes 12 minutes earlier. The destroyer escort had been hunting Japanese submarines for 6 days as part of a barrier patrol protecting the invasion fleet assembling for the Marianas Campaign. Contact bearing 095, range 2,100 yards, Sonarman First Class John Lowerman reported, his voice calm despite the tension in the small compartment. Target is submerged, making turns for approximately 4 knots, depth estimated at 180 feet. Pendleton studied the tactical plot. The submarine, identified as I-16 based on radio intelligence intercepts, was attempting to slip through the patrol line. Her commander had no way of knowing that USS England's QC sonar had detected him at over 4,000 yards, nearly 5 miles, and had been tracking his every movement for the past 20 minutes. All ahead full. Come right to 095. Prepare Hedgehog for firing, Pendleton ordered. USS England surged forward, her twin screws churning the water as she accelerated to 22 knots. In the sonar room, Lowerman maintained continuous contact, calling out range and bearing updates every 30 seconds. The submarine below had no indication it had been detected. Japanese doctrine assumed that American destroyers needed visual contact or extremely close acoustic detection before attacking. Aboard I-16, Commander Yoshitome Takasue believed his submarine was safely beneath the thermal layer at 150 feet, invisible to surface vessels. His hydrophone operators reported propeller noise in the distance, but at ranges exceeding 3 kilometers, well beyond what Japanese intelligence assessed as American detection capability. Yoshitomi ordered a course change to avoid the general area, unaware that the American destroyer was tracking his submarine with mechanical precision. Range 1,200 yards and closing, Lowerman reported. Bearing steady. Target maintaining course and depth. The Hedgehog weapon, mounted forward on USS England's bow, consisted of 24 spigot mortars arranged in a circular pattern. Each projectile weighed 65 pounds and carried a 35-pound Torpex warhead that detonated only on direct contact. Unlike depth charges that exploded at preset depths, creating area effects, Hedgehog required accurate targeting. But with continuous sonar tracking, that accuracy was devastating. Range 400 yards. Target steady on course 070. Fire, Hedgehog! The mortars fired in rapid sequence, a sound like a giant typewriter. 24 projectiles arced forward, splashing into the ocean in an elliptical pattern 250 yards ahead of USS England. The sonar maintained contact as the projectiles sank toward their target. Inside I-16, the first indication of attack was the sound of objects hitting the water above. Yoshitomi had just enough time to order emergency depth when the first Hedgehog projectile struck the submarine's pressure hull amidships. The contact-fused explosive detonated instantly. At 180 feet depth, the pressure wave from the 35-pound warhead was catastrophic. The explosion tore through M16's hull like paper, flooding the engine room in seconds. A second projectile struck near the conning tower, collapsing the pressure hull and killing everyone in the control room instantly. On the surface, USS England's crew heard 2 distinct explosions transmitted through the water, then watched as debris began surfacing. Oil, wooden planking, clothing, and papers spread across the ocean. I-16 had been destroyed in less than 3 minutes from initial attack to final sinking. Of her crew of 101 men, none survived. "Submarine sunk," Pendleton reported to the bridge. "Continue patrol." What made this kill remarkable wasn't the outcome, but the systematic nature of the hunt. USS England had detected I-16 at a range where Japanese submarines couldn't detect surface vessels. The American destroyer had tracked the submarine through every attempted evasion, maintaining contact despite depth changes and course alterations. The final attack had been delivered while maintaining continuous sonar lock, allowing precision targeting impossible with conventional depth charges. This was I-16's fatal encounter, but it was England's third submarine kill in 5 days. On May 18th, she had sunk I-174. On May 16th, I-175. The pattern was identical in each case: long-range detection, continuous tracking, precise hedgehog attack, total destruction. By May 31st, USS England would sink 3 more Japanese submarines: RO-106 on May 22nd, RO-104 on May 23rd, and RO-105 on May 26th. 6 submarines destroyed in 12 days, a record that would never be equalled. The common factor in every kill was sonar detection at ranges Japanese commanders considered impossible. The psychological impact on surviving Japanese submarine crews was devastating. Lieutenant Commander Nakagawa Hajime of I-36 survived an attack by USS Hazelwood on June 2, 1944. In his post-war testimony to American interrogators, he described the experience. "We detected the destroyer at approximately 3,000 meters through our hydrophones, normal range. We began evasive maneuvers, descending to 100 meters depth. Then came the pinging. Ping, ping, ping. The sound penetrated our hull, made our teeth ache. We changed course. The pinging followed. We went deeper. The pinging found us. We slowed to minimum speed, silent running. The pinging never lost contact. The depth charges began falling. Not random patterns like before, but precise, following us, each pattern closer than the last. Our hydrophone operator was crying, not from fear of death, but from the impossibility of what was happening. The Americans could see us through 100 meters of water, through temperature layers, through our best evasive tactics. We were not fighting humans, but ghosts who could see through the ocean itself. I-36 survived only because Nakagawa took the desperate measure of blowing all ballast and surfacing to surrender. His submarine, severely damaged by near-miss depth charges, would have sunk within hours. The crew's preference for capture over continued underwater pursuit demonstrated how completely sonar had destroyed Japanese submarine morale. Medical reports from rescued Japanese submarine crews revealed severe psychological trauma. Survivors exhibited symptoms that Navy psychiatrists classified as acoustic shock syndrome: hypervigilance to sounds, involuntary flinching at sharp noises, nightmares featuring mechanical pinging, and refusal to enter enclosed spaces. The sound of active sonar had become more terrifying than the explosions themselves because it represented inescapable detection. Commander Hashimoto Mochitsura, captain of I-58, who would later sink USS Indianapolis in July 1945, described the change in Japanese submarine operations in his post-war memoir. By mid-1944, every patrol became a suicide mission. We could no longer operate with confidence. Every time we submerged, we knew American destroyers might be tracking us from beyond our detection range. The pinging could come at any moment, and once it found you, escape was nearly impossible. We went to sea, knowing we probably wouldn't return. The statistics reflected this grim reality. In 1943, Japanese submarines sank 92 Allied vessels totaling 516,000 tons. In 1944, that number dropped to 51 vessels totaling 227,000 tons, despite Japan deploying more submarines. In the same period, Allied forces sank 47 Japanese submarines in 1943 and 56 in 1944. The kill ratio had reversed completely, and the primary factor was American sonar superiority. By late 1944, Japanese submarines avoided American destroyer escorts entirely when possible. Operational orders specifically warned commanders about vessels equipped with advanced detection equipment. But with over 2,000 American destroyers and destroyer escorts operating in the Pacific by war's end, avoidance became impossible. The ocean had become a hunting ground where Japanese submarines were the prey. The numbers told a story of systematic annihilation. Between January 1943 and August 1945, the Imperial Japanese Navy lost 128 submarines to enemy action out of a total fleet of 174 boats, a casualty rate of 73.6%. By comparison, the US Navy lost 52 submarines out of 288, a rate of 18%. The disparity wasn't explained by Japanese tactical failures or American numerical superiority alone. The primary factor was acoustic detection technology that rendered Japanese submarines visible when they believed themselves invisible. The detection range advantage created an insurmountable tactical gap. American QC sonar could reliably detect submerged submarines at 2,500 yards under typical conditions, with maximum ranges exceeding 4,000 yards in favorable acoustic environments. Japanese Type 93 hydrophones, operating passively, rarely detected American destroyers beyond 2,000 yards, and often much less. This meant American hunters could locate Japanese submarines at distances where the submarines remained unaware of their pursuers. The mathematics became lethal when combined with weapon systems. Traditional depth charge attacks required destroyers to pass over the submarine's estimated position, losing sonar contact during the critical moments of weapon release. Success rates hovered around 5% per attack. The Hedgehog system, maintaining continuous sonar contact throughout the attack, achieved kill rates exceeding 25%. This five-fold improvement reflected the transformation from area weapons to precision targeting. Production statistics demonstrated the industrial gulf between the combatants. By war's end, American shipyards had produced 563 destroyer escorts specifically designed for anti-submarine warfare. Each vessel carried QC sonar, Hedgehog projectors, and trained crews. Japan, struggling to replace merchant shipping losses, built only 63 destroyer escorts during the entire war, most lacking advanced detection equipment. The sonar set production alone illustrated American industrial capacity. Western Electric and subcontractors manufactured over 60,000 sonar sets of various types between 1942 and 1945, averaging nearly 2,000 units monthly at peak production. Each set required precision components, waterproof housings, and complex electronics. Japan produced fewer than 800 hydrophone sets during the same period, all of them passive listening devices inferior to American equipment from a decade earlier. Training amplified the technological advantage. American sonar schools graduated over 50,000 operators during the war, each receiving minimum 240 hours of instruction. These operators could distinguish submarine echoes from biological contacts, thermal layers, and sea-bottom returns. They practiced tracking evasive targets until they could maintain acoustic lock through course changes and depth variations. Japanese hydrophone operators learned through apprenticeship without standardized training or sophisticated practice equipment. The kill ratios reflected these combined advantages. In 1942, Japanese submarines sank 2.1 Allied vessels for every submarine lost. By 1943, that ratio had dropped to 1.3 to 1. In 1944, it collapsed to 0.5 to 1, meaning Japan lost 2 submarines for every Allied vessel sunk. By 1945, Japanese submarines were being destroyed at rates exceeding their operational effectiveness by factors of 5 or more. Geographic coverage demonstrated American naval expansion. In 1943, approximately 400 American destroyers and destroyer escorts operated in the Pacific. By 1945, that number exceeded 2,000. Each vessel carried sonar equipment and trained operators. Japanese submarines had nowhere to operate without risk of detection. The ocean, once vast enough to hide in, had become a transparent killing ground. The acoustic advantage extended to offensive operations. American submarines equipped with passive sonar and sophisticated fire control computers achieved remarkable success against Japanese shipping. They sank 1,178 Japanese merchant vessels totaling 4.9 million tons, approximately 55% of Japan's merchant fleet. Japanese submarines, forced into defensive operations by constant American hunter-killer groups, sank only 184 Allied vessels totaling 907,000 tons after 1942. The economic impact was devastating. Each Japanese I-class submarine cost approximately 15 million yen and required 18 months to construct. Losing 128 submarines represented over 1.9 billion yen and 192 submarine years of construction capacity. These resources, diverted to a submarine force that couldn't operate effectively, might have built destroyers, cargo vessels, or aircraft that Japan desperately needed. Personnel losses were catastrophic. Japanese submarine crews numbered between 80 and 110 men, depending on boat type. The 128 submarines lost represented approximately 11,500 trained submariners killed, drowned, or captured. These men had received years of specialized training that couldn't be replaced. By 1945, Japan was manning submarines with crews who had received only weeks of instruction. The depth charge statistics revealed the precision of American attacks. In 1942, the average depth charge attack expended 200 charges per submarine kill. By 1944, with Hedgehog and continuous sonar tracking, that number had dropped to 32 charges per kill. This six-fold improvement in efficiency meant American destroyers could hunt longer before requiring resupply. Medical records from captured Japanese submariners documented the psychological toll. Over 60% exhibited symptoms of severe stress disorders. They described the sound of American sonar as mechanical death, a pinging that penetrated steel hulls and human minds with equal effectiveness. The terror wasn't just the explosions, but the knowledge that escape was impossible once detected. By war's end, Japanese submarine operations had effectively ceased. The few boats remaining operational were reserved for kamikaze missions, carrying human torpedoes or supplies to isolated garrisons. The force that had entered the war, confident in its superiority, had been systematically destroyed by an enemy whose acoustic technology they never understood and could never match. October 1945. Yokosuka Naval Base, Japan. Commander Hashimoto Mochitsura sat across from American intelligence officers, chain-smoking cigarettes while describing his wartime experiences commanding IG-58. His submarine had achieved what most Japanese boats never did, surviving the war while sinking a major American warship, USS Indianapolis. Yet when asked about American anti-submarine capabilities, his confidence dissolved. "The sonar," Hashimoto said through the interpreter, his hands trembling slightly. "That was what defeated us. Not your depth charges, not your aircraft, but that mechanical pinging that found us no matter what we did." In 1942, we operated freely. By 1944, every patrol meant hearing that sound. Ping, ping, ping. It followed us through depth changes, course alterations, silent running. Once it locked onto us, escape was nearly impossible. The interrogation records, declassified in 1975, revealed similar testimonies from dozens of surviving Japanese submarine commanders. Lieutenant Commander Nakagawa Hajime, captured when I-36 surrendered after a sonar-guided attack, described the psychological impact. "The first time I heard American sonar, I didn't understand what it was. a sharp metallic echo passing through our hull. My crew looked at each other in confusion. Then the depth charges began falling, precisely targeted. We realized the Americans could see us, actually see us through the ocean. That understanding changed everything. Commander Kinashi Takakazu, whose I-19 had sunk USS Wasp in 1942 but was forced to surrender in 1943 after a sonar attack, provided technical assessment. Japanese intelligence told us American detection equipment was primitive, limited to perhaps 1,000 meters maximum range. We operated confidently within those assumptions. Then we encountered destroyers that detected us from 5 kilometers away. 5 kilometers. Our hydrophones couldn't hear them at that range, yet they tracked us with precision. We had been fighting blind against an enemy who could see perfectly. The post-war symposium held in 1962 brought together American and Japanese submarine veterans. The contrast in their wartime experiences was stark. American submariners described operating with confidence, supported by superior sonar, radar, and fire control systems. Japanese submariners described increasing terror as American detection capabilities improved. Commander Orita Zenji, who survived multiple depth charge attacks, spoke at the symposium. By 1944, we knew that submerging during daylight meant probable death. American destroyers would find us with their sonar. We couldn't hide. The ocean had become transparent to them while we remained blind. The psychological stress was unbearable. Every dive might be your last. Every ping meant death was hunting you. These testimonies, preserved in naval archives and veteran associations, documented not just tactical defeat, but complete psychological collapse. The weapon that defeated Japanese submarines wasn't explosive, but acoustic. The sound of American sonar became more terrifying than the weapons it guided, because it represented the impossibility of escape. August 15, 1945. The Emperor's radio broadcast announcing Japan's surrender reached submarine crews scattered across the Pacific. Of the 174 submarines that had served in the Imperial Japanese Navy during the war, only 46 remained operational. The rest, 128 boats and approximately 11,500 men, rested on the ocean floor, most destroyed by the acoustic technology they never understood and could never counter. The final accounting was devastating. The Imperial Japanese Navy's submarine force entered the war as an elite striking arm, confident in their superiority. They possessed the world's best torpedoes, the longest-range boats, and crews with decades of training. They exited the war with a 73.6% casualty rate, the highest loss percentage of any major submarine force in history. American submarines, by comparison, lost 52 boats out of 288, an 18% casualty rate. This fourfold difference in survival wasn't explained by Japanese incompetence or American bravery. The decisive factor was technology. American sonar could detect Japanese submarines at ranges exceeding 4,000 yards. Japanese hydrophones rarely detected American vessels beyond 2,000 yards. This asymmetry created a hunting ground where one side could see and the other remained blind. The strategic impact extended beyond submarine losses. Japanese submarines sank 184 Allied vessels totaling 907,000 tons after 1942, a diminishing contribution to Japan's war effort. American submarines, operating with acoustic advantages and superior fire control, sank 1,178 Japanese merchant vessels totaling 4.9 million tons, strangling Japan's war economy and starving the home islands of resources. Post-war analysis by Japanese naval historians identified American sonar as the decisive technological advantage. The 1950 report by the Japanese Defense Agency concluded, "The development of active acoustic detection by American forces rendered obsolete all Japanese submarine doctrine and tactics. Our boats, designed for stealth operations based on passive acoustic detection, became visible to an enemy who controlled the acoustic environment. No amount of crew skill or tactical innovation could overcome this fundamental technological disadvantage. The human cost was measured not just in deaths, but in psychological trauma. Medical examinations of repatriated submarine crews in 1945 to 1946 revealed that over 70% suffered from what would later be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder. The symptoms were remarkably consistent: hypervigilance to sounds, particularly sharp metallic noises, nightmares featuring mechanical pinging, claustrophobia and panic in enclosed spaces, involuntary flinching at sudden noises. Dr. Takashi Yamamoto, who treated returning submariners at Yokosuka Naval Hospital, documented these cases. The men described a specific terror associated with American sonar, not fear of death, which all combat veterans experience, but fear of inescapable detection. They knew that once the pinging started, no skill or bravery could save them. The sound penetrated steel hulls and human minds equally. Many refused to bathe because the echo of water in enclosed spaces triggered panic attacks. The contrast with American submarine veterans was striking. American submariners faced dangers from depth charges, aircraft, and surface vessels, but they operated with confidence in their technological advantages. Japanese submariners described operating in constant terror once American sonar became widespread in 1943. At the 1985 Pacific Theater Veterans Reunion in Hawaii, surviving Japanese submariners met their American counterparts. Commander Orita Zenji, then 72 years old, spoke about his wartime experiences. "We thought we were invisible. We believed the ocean would protect us. Then your sonar found us, and we realized we had been fighting a war we couldn't win. The technology gap wasn't just quantitative, but qualitative. You had transformed naval warfare while we remained in the previous generation." Captain Edward Beach, US Navy submariner and historian, responded, "Japanese submarines were excellently designed and their crews were brave." But warfare had changed. Active sonar didn't just improve detection, it revolutionized it. The ocean became transparent to the side with better acoustic technology. That transparency determined the war's outcome beneath the waves. The legacy endured. Post-war Japan, rebuilding its maritime self-defense force in the 1950s, adopted American sonar technology wholesale. The lesson was clear: in modern naval warfare, acoustic detection capability determined survival. Japanese naval architects and engineers studied American systems, understanding finally what had defeated them. By 1960, Japanese defense forces operated sonar equipment equivalent to American standards. But the generation who had experienced the war's acoustic terror never forgot. The sound of active sonar to them would always mean death was hunting. The transformation of naval warfare through acoustic detection represented more than technological advancement. It marked the moment when invisible physics became more decisive than visible tactics, when scientific understanding of sound propagation underwater determined survival more surely than crew courage or submarine design. Commander Yokota Minoru, who had confidently stalked USS Saratoga in December 1941, survived the war. In a 1970 interview with Japanese naval historians, he reflected on the transformation. "We entered the war believing we understood submarine warfare. We had the best torpedoes, the longest-range boats, the most experienced crews. What we didn't understand was that warfare itself was changing. The Americans weren't just improving existing technology, they were transforming the fundamental nature of undersea combat. When I first heard about submarines being detected at 5 kilometers, Yokota continued, I thought it was propaganda or exaggeration. Then I experienced it myself in 1944. The pinging found us at ranges where our hydrophones detected nothing. We ran silent, changed depth, altered course. The pinging followed. It was like being hunted by a ghost who could see through steel and water. That's when I understood we had lost not just tactically, but conceptually. We were fighting the previous war while the Americans had moved to the next one. The statistical legacy was irrefutable. Of 11,500 Japanese submariners who served during the war, approximately 8,500 died, a 73.6% casualty rate unmatched by any other service branch in any navy. American submariners, facing similar operational dangers, suffered a 22% casualty rate. The difference was almost entirely attributable to acoustic detection technology and the tactical advantages it provided. The merchant shipping statistics told the broader strategic story. American submarines, guided by superior sonar and fire control systems, sank 4.9 million tons of Japanese merchant shipping, approximately 55% of Japan's merchant fleet. This destroyed Japan's ability to import raw materials, transport troops, or sustain its war economy. Japanese submarines, increasingly hunted by American destroyers equipped with advanced sonar, sank less than 1 million tons of Allied shipping after 1942, a strategically negligible contribution. The technological gap extended beyond the war. Post-war analysis revealed that Japanese naval research had been aware of active sonar principles since the 1930s, but lacked the industrial capacity and theoretical physics knowledge to develop effective systems. Bell Laboratories alone employed more acoustical engineers than existed in all of Japan. American universities were graduating hundreds of electrical engineers annually who understood radio frequency theory applicable to sonar design. Japan had perhaps a dozen such specialists. The lessons learned shaped Cold War naval doctrine. The US Navy invested billions in sonar research, developing systems that could detect submarines at ranges exceeding 50 miles under ideal conditions. The Soviet Union, recognizing sonar's decisive advantage, built entire research institutes dedicated to acoustic detection and countermeasures. Modern submarine warfare became primarily an acoustic competition, with stealth and detection capabilities determining survival. At the U.S. Naval Institute's 1995 symposium commemorating the war's end, Captain John Alden, submarine historian, summarized the transformation. Japanese submarines weren't defeated by American aggression or superior numbers. They were defeated by physics. Sound travels through water at 4,900 feet per second. The side that better understood how to generate, transmit, receive, and interpret acoustic signals controlled the undersea battlefield. American sonar gave us eyes where the Japanese remained blind. In that fundamental asymmetry lay their doom. The human dimension remained most poignant. At the 2005 reunion of Japanese submarine veterans in Tokyo, only 17 men attended, the survivors of a force that once numbered thousands. Petty Officer Yamada Kenso, who had served aboard I-58 with Commander Hashimoto, spoke about the legacy. "We carry the memory of that sound. The ping that meant death was hunting. Our children ask what the war was like. How do you explain terror that comes through water and steel? How do you describe knowing you're invisible to your own senses, but completely visible to the enemy? We survived, but we never escaped that sound. It lives in our nightmares still." The memorial at Kura Naval Base lists 8,500 names of submariners who never returned. Most died not in heroic surface battles, but crushed by depth charges guided to their positions by acoustic detection they never understood. Their deaths represented not just tactical defeat, but technological obsolescence, the inevitable outcome when one side achieves fundamental superiority in the physics of detection. The American sonar operators who hunted them rarely saw their victims. They watched oscilloscope traces, listened to return echoes, computed firing solutions from acoustic data. The killing was abstract, technological, efficient, yet some recognized the human cost. Sonarman First Class John Lowerman, who had tracked multiple Japanese submarines to their destruction aboard USS England, said in a 1988 interview, We were good at our jobs, the equipment was excellent, the training was thorough. But sometimes at night I'd think about the men in those submarines. They never knew we were there until the pinging started. They had no chance. That's what superior technology meant. Not a fair fight, but no fight at all. The lesson transcended naval warfare. In modern combat, the side that can detect the enemy first, at the greatest range, with the most precision, possesses overwhelming advantage. Japanese submariners learned this truth through terror and death. Their experience stands as testament to how completely technological superiority can determine warfare's outcome, regardless of courage, training, or tactical skill. The ping of American sonar, that sharp metallic echo that penetrated steel hulls and human minds, marked the end of one era and the beginning of another. It was the sound of the future hunting the past, of physics defeating tradition, of American industrial and scientific capacity overwhelming Japanese warrior spirit. It was the sound that changed naval warfare forever, and the sound that 8,500 Japanese submariners heard as their last.